All right, let's make sure we get everything hooked up here. All right, let's go over here. Let's take a look. Get the live one going. Are we synced up? Let's see. Are we synced up here? Let's check it out. Are we? There we go. Okay, yes, we are. Good. All right. All right, let me just share this real quick on Twitter and then we'll get going. Here we go. Okay. Just a sec, folks. Sorry for the delay. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. Alrighty, so we are posted. Everything is good. Hello, Jonathan. Thanks for joining from the gym. Very glad that you're here. So, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whoever you are, wherever you are. It is yet again, somehow we made it to Saturday again, and it's 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And this is UnShrink Me, a weekly podcast. And I am Dr. Patrick Lockwood. But for the purpose of this podcast, I'm just Patrick. So feel free, please do not sue me, but feel free to cancel me. This is a weekly podcast on my YouTube channel, The Psychology Checkup. And UnShrink Me is about you, the consumers of therapy. So my goal, kind of like very straightforwardly, is to make sure that anyone who is seeking out mental health services, counseling, psychology, psychiatry, couples therapy, Christian counseling, whatever it is, doesn't matter what the background is, I want you to get the most out of the services that you're seeking out from people. And so on this weekly podcast, I talk about relevant ideas with regard to clinical psychology, psychiatry, and so on and so forth. I find most of my ideas on Twitter, and so I will be talking about things that I found on Twitter. I'll be retweeting them as we're going along. So if you are not on Twitter, you should probably join. And if you are, follow me. My handle is at Alobha Patrick. At ALOBHAPATRICK. I am Aloha Patrick on Twitter, and I will be reposting the things I'm discussing live today on the podcast. Today's podcast is going to be interesting because I don't usually delve into the political very much because I'm not really a political person. So my goal with this podcast is to stick to the concepts of psychology and not bring politics into things if at all possible. And by the way, we are not NOT sponsored by Celsius. However, this stuff is great. But I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about our friends over in the MAHA space, Make America Healthy Again space, because their leader, RFK Jr., said something I think rather problematic on his announcement or whatever about addiction treatment. And I want to kind of walk that out because I have extensive experience in that industry. And then I want to talk a little bit about the wisdom of mental illness because that seemed to be a very trendy topic this week, and a lot of very unwell people seem to be weighing in. So I think it's worth talking about those two topics at length, and then anything else that seems to show up. And as always, if you are here in the chat, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And the main goal of this podcast, again, is to critique ideas so that we can have a better understanding of mental health, mental illness, and make better decisions with our providers so that we get the most out of those services. I am not giving you specific advice, so this is not specifically directed at any individual. Hello, Phil, UnShrink Me. Good to see you, sir. So before I get into the two main topics, which are, again, the MAHA folks in Rehabistan and the wisdom, let's say, of mental illness, I always like to start with a softball to kind of warm us up here. And to start with the kind of very simple kind of cleaning up my mistakes softball here. I think it was last week, Seth Fowler was kind enough to make a few points on the podcast, and I didn't do justice about his point about politics and therapy. And so I actually want to start with Seth's discussion from last week's live broadcast. So last week, and Seth, if you're here watching and listening, please show up in the chat and let me know if I'm getting this right. But basically, Seth was saying something to the effect of, and Seth is on Twitter, by the way. His handle is at SETHLFOWLER. So Seth L. Fowler. So Seth is a good follow. You should follow him if you're into mental health topics. He's a good voice on this, I think. But he said in the chat last week, what do we do with the fact that a lot of people politicize therapy? And I think that's a perfect introduction to today's main topic, which is about the MAHA folks. So this is a very scandalous topic, admittedly. And so I'm not going to try and be extra scandalous beyond my regular mundane thoughts that probably aren't going to be received as very mundane. So I have two different sets of thoughts about what politics should be doing in therapy and should not be doing in therapy. On the one hand, I think it is completely unavoidable in the sense that everyone who has lost their mind and made everything politics for the last, I'd say, 15 years, especially thanks to Trump. And the news media are to blame for that. And I think that our parents sucked at managing us and all this stuff. There's so many reasons. But I think people have made everything political, and God bless, and it's so stupid. But it's always going to be there. So we're always going to probably have some degree of politic discussions in therapy because the world is absurd and we are hyper engaged in understanding all the discourses about whatever is happening. So if you're a professional, if you're a mental health professional, you should expect that it'll probably come up in your conversation. That's a mundane thought number one. Mundane thought number two is you, the professional, should leave your political beliefs out of it. Just like you should leave your childhood stuff out of it. Just like you should leave your beliefs about money and sex and sexuality and religion and all these things out of your therapy. And the reason I say this is because it's not your freaking therapy. It is your job to be the adult in the room, and good adults are good at compartmentalizing as needed. Your job, you are being paid as a professional to help a person sitting across from you, or multiple persons if it's family or couples therapy, with a specifically well-defined clinical goal. And so if your patient has PTSD, whether it's because of something they saw in the news, they were physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, neglected, abandoned, whatever it was, it doesn't matter what the content is. Your job is to do the types of therapies that help them with their PTSD, regardless of the content. And you are to have no opinion about the content because your job is not to have an opinion about the content. Your job is to have an opinion about what tools will likely work. And it's that simple. So if you are a clinician and you're bringing your politics into the room, shame on you. I don't know why you're in the profession, in my opinion. That's not your job. You can have your opinions with your friends online. That's all fine. But if you're bringing it into therapy, you're the problem. There's something wrong with you, in my opinion. So, dear Seth, I hope that adequately discusses what you asked in our chat last week. And if anyone disagrees, let me know. And let me know if it's a principled disagreement or just an emotional one. I'm guessing it mostly would be emotional. All right. So, without further delay, let's get into the main topic, and then we'll get into some secondary topics that I also think are very important. So, earlier this week, and I'm going to retweet this real quick. And again, if you're not on Twitter, please get on Twitter. And my handle is at AlobhaPatrick, at ALOBHAPEATRICK. So, the quote from the so-called MAHA, Make America Healthy Again _action account, which is, I think, the official MAHA account for the federal government, said the following, and I quote, you go to a rehab, and if you relapse, the rehab gets paid twice. RFK Jr. says it's time recovery clinics are rewarded for helping people get better, not for repeat visits. You get paid if the addict stays unhealthy. We haven't aligned the economic incentives with healthcare incentives. So this is probably, again, I'm not a super political person, but I think this is probably the first time I have had a fairly strong reaction to anything that, this group of people has said and done, because it's really fucking stupid. And so let's be 100% clear that, and this is what I said in my tweet, I am perhaps, and I quote, the most publicly outspoken person on this platform and podcasts about all of the fraud in so-called Rehabistan. But this is a really idiotic perspective. Relapse happens all the time, and often not because of fraud or incompetence. And if he wants help, I can help him. But here's what's really stupid about what he said. First off, you go to a rehab, and if you relapse, the rehab gets paid twice. I don't know what to tell you, but if you break your car and then they fix it, and then you break it again and they fix it again, that makes sense because the person's providing a paid service for you. So it's not like you break your car once, it's fixed, looks great, brand new bumper, all shiny, perfect paint job. You go out, you get in another accident, not your fault. Should you have to pay for that again? Probably, because it's a service. And rehabs, therapy, psychiatry, counseling, coaching, whatever, these are all services which should be paid. So let me be 100% clear that it's absolute crap that if you relapse, you shouldn't have to pay again or something like that. I don't know what idiotic quote this was meant to be, like profound or something, but it's really stupid. People should always get paid for the services they are providing, regardless, even if you hate them. Even if you think they're bad at their job, you should still pay them. And if you think they're bad at their job, you should go to a different clinic or rehab. It's that simple. So that's first and foremost. Second, the other quote is, you get paid if the addict stays unhealthy. I don't know what to tell anyone. And so let me just back the train up a little bit, because let me be very, very clear about this. There are psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, LMFTs, LPCCs, people of all degrees and backgrounds who work with people who are actively unhealthy, who stay unhealthy. Addiction is a chronic relapsing disorder, per the National Institute of Drug Abuse, AA, and everybody else. And he is in recovery, so he should know better. So these chronic relapsing conditions are probably going to, quote unquote, stay unhealthy for quite some time, even in the best rehabs. Because not everyone who comes to rehab actually wants to get better. And I have a Jonathan Shedler post that I want to talk about. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made the stupidest fucking speech apparently about this, because on the one hand, yes, there is so much fraud and there's way more waste. There's fraud and waste in the addiction industry. I have spoken at length about this on this podcast, on other podcasts like Ryan Rogers' podcast, and so many others. And I will just briefly here outline some of the fraud that happens and some of the waste that happens. So let me give you two examples of fraud that happen in the rehab industry all the time. So fraud example number one is overbilling for services like urine testing. So a lot of people in different treatment centers will urine test patients far more frequently than they should. So if you had a very low level of care, low intensity care, like you see a patient once a week or 3 times a week in an IOP or something, you might urine test them twice a week, maybe, or once a week. But some shady sober livings hook up with outpatient programs and urine test people 3 or 4 times a week or 5 times a week, which is absurd. And so it is very clear that people will do urinalysis testing scams where they overbill the insurance for them to make extra cash, even though there's no medical justification to test people 3, 4, 5 times a week. That's common. Another common fraud that happens all the time in Rehabistan is called body brokering. Body brokering is when typically a treatment center owner or operator or a sober living owner or operator will encourage a patient to go relapse, maybe for a day, maybe for 2 days. Maybe these people will even give the patient drugs to go get high so that they can come back again and detox again, because detox pays more money than residential or outpatient. And so if your insurance is going to pay $2,000 a day, but it only costs $1,000 a day to run your program, then you can split the extra grand with the patient. Give them $500, you keep extra $500, everything's good. Because these are desperate drug addicts who are sometimes too high or too sick or whatever it is to know that they're part of a highly fraudulent felony. And that happens all the time, unfortunately. So those are just two of a number of examples of fraud that happen all the time in treatment centers. Now let's talk about waste. Waste happens all the time in treatment because people are kept in treatment longer than they need to be. You do not need to be locked away for 30 days, 45 days in a residential program or a detox, because most of the time your acute detox lasts between a week or less than a week, maybe two. Hey, Angie, glad you're here. So like people are kept longer in treatment than they should. That happens all the time, and that's waste, and waste happens all the time. And sometimes documentation fraud is what you do to keep people in treatment longer, and that's horrible. So yes, fraud and waste happen all the time in rehabs, all the time. And I am privy to it, and it's disgusting. And what I will tell you, I'm not causing it, I'm not creating it, but I see it because I live in Southern California, and what do you think happens out here? And so here's the truth. Here's the God's honest truth. It is, on the one hand, think like DBT wise mind. On the one hand, it's totally true that waste and fraud happen all the time in treatment, and it's disgusting and immoral, and shame on those people, and what is wrong with you? That's true. And also what RFK said is fucking stupid, because if people relapse, you should be able to go back to a program, whether it's a great program, an okay program, a meh program, or a bad program, and try it again. You should not be punished because your patient relapsed. That's absurd. And so that's stupid. The idea that people, quote unquote, get paid if the patient stays unhealthy, I don't know what to tell you, because managed care already tries to push people out of programs. And it's really, really stupid. Absolutely stupid. It's 100% stupid that, the idea that the patient's going to like magically get better in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Like some of these people with chronic conditions, like severe depression or very, very, very severe addiction or whatever it is, these people are not going to get well with a 30-day stay or 60 days of therapy or something like that. Like they need a lot of support long term. So the idea that you get paid if they stay unhealthy, well, like, yeah, they're going to be unhealthy for quite some time. Could we do better jobs of aligning the economic incentives with people doing well? Yes, but managed care already does this, and they do it very poorly. And there's no way some law you're going to write is going to make it better. Because the idea that we can perfectly understand the algorithm of health for people with chronic trauma or chronic severe depression or personality disorders or addictions or a combination of those things is absurd. No one has done it. No one has done it successfully. It's always a mess, and it's not linear. Recovery is not linear. So there's just no way on God's green earth you can correctly create incentives to make rehab go better. It's too broken as a system, especially because it's insurance-based. Angie says, I worked at a treatment center in Costa Mesa. They know it doesn't work and they don't want it to work because they get repeat customers. And that's true. And I was just saying, there's plenty of fraud like that out there. But there are also good programs that actually try to help people. I've worked for a few of them. I currently consult with a few of them. And so it's very, very possible to find good programs that actually help people not die of withdrawal, right? Because if you're coming off of alcohol or if you're coming off of benzos like Xanax, withdrawals can kill you. So some detoxes are extremely useful. I don't want people to die because they're trying to cold turkey something at home or taper on their own at home when they're having like life-threatening blood pressure issues. So my concern is that this MAHA nonsense is going to further convince people that they just don't need any support, which is horseshit. Tons of people, especially very, very sick people, need the most support and will cost society lots of money. Now, if you want to talk about where that money comes from, fair enough. California here has the millionaire tax or whatever. I'm open to whatever discussion anyone wants to have about how to help pay for people who are very, very ill. The chronically ill in this country get the worst care. The mildly ill get the most care, which is also weird. Those people don't even really need therapy in many cases, or rehab or whatever it is. And so, yes, there's a fraud problem. Yes, there's a waste problem. And what Angie described in the chat is 100% true. Phil said rehab is for quitters. It is for quitters. And some people actually want to get better in rehab, and God bless them. And I have the privilege of seeing it happen every week. I have the privilege of seeing people actually want to get better and try to get better every week. Is there a perfect rehab? Is there a perfectly well-run rehab? No, it's impossible because rehabs are run by people. So people make mistakes, people fail, people have biases. There's no perfect therapist. There's no perfect counselor. There's no perfect anyone. So the question we should all be asking ourselves is, what is the best way to fund this? What is the best way to catch people engaging in fraud? If you want to spend all sorts of government money catching fraud in Rehabistan, awesome. I'll help you out. I'll write out so many people, no problem. 100%. No question. I don't give a shit. I don't care if it destroys my reputation. Fuck them. Because they're hurting people. So for me, it's very simple. This MAHA nonsense is not going to encourage people to actually get help. And some people desperately need help. And the idea that rehab is just a perverse incentive system is so stupid because there's plenty of good programs. Not all of them are. None of them are perfect, but there's plenty of good programs. And a lot of people get sober in all sorts of places that are even terribly shady, unfortunately. Some people go to sober livings that are abusive. Some people go to state-funded programs that are really abusive but still get better. So there's lots of trajectories and journeys, and I don't like that people get hurt, and I don't like abuse. All I would say is that it's not like the whole system has to die, or it's not like you can magically fix the incentives with government law, because you cannot. Because you have to fix the people in the rehabs before you can fix the incentives. Angie says the whole system is fucked. I agree. Telling people they have comorbid illness, then dope them up with psych drugs and Suboxone. You know, some people benefit from those drugs and some people don't. And it's that simple. And the people that don't benefit from those drugs should never be on them. The problem is we don't have careful providers. We have people that are just trying to make it work. We have imperfect systems that need to be refined, and that is why I'm happy to stay a consultant for the time being. Because what I get to do as a consultant is go out there and help fix these systems and make them better and more ethical. And that's an uphill battle, but I'm happy to be in that fight until I no longer need to be. Now, this is not me advertising my services, just so we're clear. I'm just telling you this is what I do for my day job, so I have a very strong opinion about what RFK Jr. said. Would it be awesome if we could just burn them all down or something like that, metaphorically, not literally, and just be done and close them all and everyone would get better? No, that's bullshit because a lot of people would die and get hurt. You can't unring the bell. You cannot unring the bell. What you have to do is you have to find ways to punish people effectively, catch the fraud quicker, and punish them very, very harshly, publicly. I think humiliating them would be useful. And once you start to get rid of more and more of the bad players, the more mediocre players and the good players get more patience and they can get better. So really, if you want to be better about this, RFK Jr., what you need to spend your time and money doing is finding all the Medicare fraud in rehabs, all the Medicaid fraud. You want to find all the insurance fraud. You want to put the FBI in these people. There's so many ways to find the fraud and the abuse and the waste in these programs, and it's not rocket science. So if you invested a few $30-40 million or whatever of government money and time into that, you could probably save the federal government, hundreds of millions of dollars, private citizens hundreds of millions of dollars, and get more people into better programs. So the first thing you should be doing is finding the fraud and the waste But this idea that if people relapse, they shouldn't go back a second time is horseshit. And he should know better because he's in recovery. So shame on him, in my opinion. So that's what I have to say about that. I'm not going to belabor the point because I'll just get more unprofessional. Now, I want to follow that discussion up with a post from Jonathan Shedler, who I appreciate and respect very much. So let me retweet it real quick because it directly relates to what I was just saying. Okay. So speaking about drug rehabs, residentials, detoxes, mental health residential programs, there's a lot of reasons why people relapse. So if you are listening to this and your loved one is in recovery or needs to get sober, if you have friends who need to get sober, if you have friends, spicy today, yes, Jonathan. Let me be very clear that the vast majority of people that come to like a drug rehab or a detox or a res don't actually want to get better. I'm going to say that again. A great many people, probably over 60%, if not more, that come to drug rehabs, mental health programs, residentials, they do not want to get better. They don't want to live better. They don't want to change their behavior, their thoughts, or their feelings. They just want to, quote unquote, feel better. And that's not the same thing. And so here is what Jonathan said, and I'm going to expand on this for the rehab perspective too. So, and I quote, "One day ago, the truth is many patients do not come to therapy to change. Not really. They may say and think they want to change. It soon becomes evident that they want to continue behaving exactly the person they have always been and living life in the same self-limiting ways, but feel better living those same self-limiting ways. Real therapy begins with helping the person to not only understand, but truly take to heart what they want is impossible." So people have to literally understand that you cannot come to treatment and want to live the exact same way, but feel better. It's not going to happen. Angie says, "I don't agree with you. The people who go are scared and hurt, and it's too hard to be sober until you're really ready." So you and I actually agree about, I think, everything you said. It's complicated, but I think we might be saying the same thing, Angie. She says, "I would say that less than 20% don't want to. They just got in trouble or ran out or something. And you've been around it 4 times. Great. But you're okay now, and that's good." So, and your path is not the traditional path for a lot of people. So there's a lot of different paths that people take to getting well, right? So it's actually a very complicated landscape, not a simple go to rehab, get better landscape. It's actually a very complicated landscape. Some people never go to rehab and get better. Some people never go to therapy and get better. Some people go to church and get better. Some people go to AA and get better. Some people don't go anywhere. Some people get divorced, and because they got divorced, because their spouse left them, because they're tired of them, that wakes them up. There's so many paths to living a better life. But the problem is the vast majority of people do not actually want to get better. The vast majority of people are too scared, too uninsightful, or not motivated to get better. That doesn't mean they're stupid. Most people can actually see the problems they have. But having the courage to change those problems, or being able to borrow courage from someone else that you can trust, is very hard to do because there are a lot of untrustworthy people in the profession, in my opinion. But also, people have all sorts of defenses. Ordinary defenses and extraordinary defenses, and personality issues, and all these things that can make it impossible for them to get better even in the best rehab. And so I blame the system and I blame the patient. I blame both because most of the time it's a combination of both. Most people that don't go to rehab and get well, sometimes they're in crappy rehabs. Sometimes they deal with sick professionals, often, as I've said on this podcast before. But sometimes they just don't want to get better and they're forced there by their family or their spouse. Sometimes they don't want to get better and they don't want to face the consequences of telling people, "No, I won't go to treatment." So they'd rather just go to treatment and waste everybody's time. I've seen it all. I've seen every combination of the patient not wanting to get better, the patient being afraid of getting better, which is the same thing, different flavor, not being motivated, being terrified, legal pressure. There's so many very good reasons and bad reasons why people go to rehab and don't ever get better. And the idea that it's fully 100% or something on the treatment provider is absurd to me. Because if you're in treatment and you're being given an opportunity to talk and deal with things and you don't take it, that is a you problem. It's not to say that it's only a you problem, but there's definitely a you problem. And so the idea, as Jonathan Shedler said, to choose wisely, you have to be very clear that if you're talking to a competent professional, they'll say, why are you here? Right? Because why are you here is the most important question. And if you do not want to be here, you should not be here. Now, financially, that's tricky for people who run these businesses because dealing with people who are quote unquote resistant, or as I say, ambivalent about treatment, can really affect your bottom line. So the industry might die if they started to work with people who actually were motivated appropriately. That doesn't mean motivation can't change over the course of time. But the vast majority of people that come to therapy, individual therapy, family therapy, couples therapy, many people do not actually want to get better. They just want to feel better, but not change the way they live. And you really cannot genuinely feel better in an enduring way unless you're changing the way you live. And good programs, good treatment centers and rehabs are trying to help you live differently. Even some of the scammy ones do that. They take you to the gym and they take you to outside meetings and they take you to socialize and learn how to have sober fun and all these things. So there's lots of things that can go right even in the worst places, and there's lots of things that can go wrong even in the best places. And so I'm not trying to be a fence sitter. I'm trying to tell you quite literally that everyone's the problem. Now, because I'm a professional of sorts, I don't sound very professional, but because I am a professional, I put more of the onus of the responsibility on the profession than the patient. However, what Jonathan Shedler is saying is 100% correct. There's a large chunk of the population that does not want to actually change their behavior. Sometimes they don't want to change because they're too selfish. Sometimes they don't want to change because they're too afraid and traumatized or abused. Sometimes they don't want to change because they cannot stand their family and they're resentful against the people that push them into treatment. Sometimes they don't want to change because the law put them there. There are so many reasons why people do not want to change. Most of them make perfect sense. All of them make sense. But if you don't want to change, then there's a really good chance it'll never work. There's a chance sometimes you'll have a good conversation with a clinician, a counselor, a sober person, and it's really important, extremely important to be able to have that experience. Sometimes that experience does not happen in treatment. Sometimes it happens after treatment. Sometimes people go get stabilized in a detox or a residential program, and they don't have a life-changing moment until they leave, and they're on their own, or they're in an IOP somewhere, or they're just seeing a therapist somewhere, or they're just with their friends and their family again. There is no perfect linear trajectory. There is no model that works 100% of the time, or even 70% of the time. So I say all this to say that everyone has to take more responsibility for this to work. Providers and patients. And if you're a provider and you can't have an honest conversation with the patient, like, why are you here? Then you are a problem. You're part of the problem. Because as Angie said, if you don't really want to be here, you have to be really ready to change. And sometimes, as Angie said, going to 4 rehabs is what will be the catalyst for eventually changing. Not that I wish that on anyone, but it happens for people. Sometimes overdosing is a catalyst for change. Sometimes it's not. You know, Phil said after treatment, most of us need aftercare. 100%. If you go to an IOP or a detox or a residential program or whatever, if you go to a weekend retreat of some kind, you should be figuring out what the path afterwards looks like. Because no one's healing journey, there's no healing journey that's just like, I'm fixed in 30 days. That's bullshit. Impossible. That summer camp thing is just like that's a halo effect. It's not real change. Real change is a long-term pattern of consistency in new behaviors. Not, I'm good because I'm in rehab, or I'm good because I'm in IOP, or I'm good because I'm seeing a therapist. If you go see your therapist once a week, hot take, if you go see your therapist once a week and you act all good and insightful and thoughtful, and you go out and spend 6 days in between that session and the next session and do nothing differently, you are wasting your money. And either your professional is missing something or you just want a paid best friend to gossip to. And having a paid best friend is wildly unethical, by the way, if you're a provider out there. So changing your behavior is always the focus of good therapy, good rehab, detox, etc. That doesn't mean it's easy. For some people, they have so much trauma, so much shame, discrimination, harassment, abuse, neglect, whatever it is, that change takes a very, very long time. Back to my earlier point about getting paid to deal with sick people. That's exactly what physicians do. Why shouldn't rehabs? I don't know. So to me, the whole point is change is hard. It's very hard. And most people do not actually want to change, because if they did, they would have. Most people have a series of reasons, justifications, excuses, defenses, valid problems that keep them from actually changing. You can have valid problems like I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, etc. That's fine. You can also have valid problems like I'm in an abusive relationship and all these things that are real and very difficult to overcome. So there's all sorts of valid reasons. There's all sorts of bullshit reasons. Defenses, denial, excuses. Both exist in most people who come to treatment. And ethical clinicians and providers should be able to suss out the valid reasons and the invalid reasons and ethically, mindfully, like adults, talk about them with the patient and try to assess and understand the process the patient's engaged in, how motivated they actually are to get better and live differently or not. So solution-focused therapy, motivational interviewing, these types of treatments are all about that. And the fact that most providers don't understand these techniques is absurd, because they're all humanistic and they allow people to change at whatever rate they're actually interested in changing. As a provider, it is not my job to change you, coerce you, corral you, convince you, ever. It is my job to explore and understand and provide encouragement. And that's it. And if you want to talk through solutions together, I'm all about that. And if you don't and you feel like you have the solution, great. Let's game plan. But most people in our profession are not like that, unfortunately. They are God in some way. They know better. They're perfect, whatever. I got sober. You should get sober the way I got sober. Those kinds of people. And it's unfortunate because it hurts people and it limits people. And so this MAHA bullshit is just not going to stand for me, because it also takes in like no accountability for the person who's actually coming to treatment. Like if they don't want to change, that's not on us, right? The only thing we're ethically supposed to do is talk about that with them and see if they're actually interested in changing their mind at some point. And it's okay to ethically work with someone until they maybe are more interested. Now, if they say, I don't want to be here anymore, that's on them, right? But a lot of people, most people don't actually want to change. Whether they have a lot of valid reasons or only one valid reason or no valid reasons, they don't want to change, because changing your behavior is hard. Changing your mind, your attitude is very hard. Feeling better is not hard. You can feel better instantaneously if you want. You can get high, you can take a nap, you can masturbate, you can eat food, you can watch a funny YouTube video, you can do dozens of things to feel better. But feeling better, my dear friends, is not the same thing as living better, just to be super duper clear. So, for what it's worth. Y'all caught me on a very spicy day. All right, let's talk about this next topic. And thank you, Angie, and everyone else for chiming in, because it's important. I don't think I have the perfect perspective. I just think I have a very realistic perspective. So, okay. Other main topic for today's podcast: the secret wisdom of being ill. Okay. So, there's this blog from, I don't know, Psychology Today that just was getting all sorts of hell online from the pro-psychiatry and the anti-psychiatry people, and everyone's mischaracterizing things that were said in the blog. And I am not even going to discuss the specific things said in the blog. I want to talk about the meta commentary of the nonsense that people are saying. So it was like what? 6/17, so like 3 days ago, June 17th, 3 days ago. Here's the title of the Psychology Today headline: When Antidepressants Harm. And I quote, "What if depression isn't a disorder or a disease at all, but a healing mechanism in its own right? Perhaps we need to listen to what our depression is trying to say." So what I said was, I am not certain there's some secret wisdom in being miserable. So that was tongue-in-cheek for anyone who wasn't catching it. But let's be very clear. When people use the word depression, whether it's psychiatrists or psychologists or counselors or anti-psychiatry, pro-psychiatry, whatever, people mean wildly different things. Some people mean any kind of low mood problem when they say the word depression, which is not what clinical depression actually is. Some people mean severe treatment-resistant major depressive disorder, which is one type of major depressive disorder that we diagnose people with. And some people mean grief, and some people mean who knows what. So let's be very, very clear that every time we have clinically significant mental health symptoms, or however you want to describe it, there's something going on that's worth understanding. Whether it's a personality disorder, a mood disorder, major depressive disorder, PTSD, a substance use disorder, a psychotic disorder, I don't care what the condition is. There are relevant themes and dynamics that are worth exploring in all conditions. Because whatever your condition that you might be labeled with, there are important themes in your life that relate to that condition. It's not like you have some illness that's magically separate from you and the rest of your personhood. Your illness is part of your conscious experience. So, because of that, if you are experiencing symptoms of mania, grandiosity, pressured speech, flight of ideas, there are probably themes to your grandiosity. There are probably themes to your flight of ideas. Those themes are important to discuss and explore and understand in therapy, because those themes might help you feel more motivated to treat yourself better and not be in a manic state and die, perhaps. So there are always themes, whatever the mental health problem is, whatever the particular illness or label or whatever. There are always important themes that are at play and important dynamics that are at play in your illness. So on the one hand, yes, the basic vague takeaway of that Psychology Today piece is correct. There are always important themes that we should be exploring, and there are always important dynamics we should be exploring that relate to your symptoms. That being said, I genuinely believe there is no secret wisdom to your depression. If you have severe major depressive disorder to the point that perhaps medications will help you, there probably is no secret wisdom about how you can't get out of bed. There probably is no insanely profound meta message about the fact that you can't get out of bed. Or the fact that you want to die is also, believe it or not, hot take number 2 today. Wanting to die is not profound. Unfortunately, it's rather ordinary. There are so many people across dozens of different circumstances that want to die. There are people in miserable chronic pain that want to die. There are people that have serious, terrible childhood trauma or molestation and they want to die. There are people with severe depression and suicidal ideation that want to die. There's so many reasons why people could want to die that they're actually mundane. Now, by the way, me describing them as mundane doesn't mean that it's not a big deal. To me, it's always a big deal. I don't want anyone to die. I want you to be here because the world needs you. The world badly needs you. So please do not die. Please get the support you deserve so that your suicidal ideation can abate and get better. And you can find purpose and meaning and hope in your life. That doesn't mean that the desire to die is radical or profound. It's not. It's actually fairly common. People in all sorts of miserable states want to die, medical and otherwise. So let's get to Angie's point. You make a good point, Angie. So thank you for saying this. She said, you're leaving out that people are not even given the opportunity to investigate root causes or have a therapist or doctor good enough to even ask about the person's life. And sometimes they jump on meds and all that stuff. And fair enough. I agree with you 100%. There are doctors, especially psychiatrists and other nurse practitioners, who jump to meds and an easy label as opposed to understanding what's happening. So that happens all the time. And many people that are quote unquote diagnosed with depression don't actually have major depressive disorder. It's not even a valid diagnosis for them because some idiot who, like you're saying, Angie, didn't take time to actually understand what was going on. Now, some people with childhood trauma or neglect or whatever it is also actually have a valid diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So both can happen. Some people have such severe biological vegetative symptoms of depression that it doesn't matter if you were yelled at or hugged enough as a kid. There's no amount of psychoanalysis that will fix that. Just like there's no amount of psychoanalysis that will fix your hallucinations. You know? There is no talking cure for seeing things that don't exist. You can't meditate your way out of psychosis. So what I believe is true is that the people that believe that there is only secret wisdom in your illness is absurd. I can't imagine that being realistic. So our job is to always be careful about jumping to any conclusion, you know? Because when people have life-threatening mania or life-threatening psychosis or life-threatening drug use, I have a very different opinion about what's going on with them, regardless of their childhood trauma. If you're telling me I'm going to kill myself tomorrow, then I'm going to focus only on safety planning and making sure you're okay, because I want you to be here. I have not only a legal and ethical reason for that, but I'm also just not a crazy, evil person. I actually want you to live. So for me, it's extremely, extremely important to not just believe that there's some secret wisdom that you're missing out on if you're badly struggling. Some people, that's true. There are always important themes, as I already said. There are always important dynamics, as I already said, regardless of your dynamics and diagnosis and meds and all these things. And there are many people who should not be on meds, that are on meds, which I've talked about before. There are many people who were diagnosed with depression incorrectly, that don't actually have major depressive disorder. Many people that have a case of depression have thyroid problems. They have hormone problems. They have diet problems. Many people that are diagnosed with depression just have a bad case of life sucks disorder. Many people are stuck in poverty and miserable. Many people that have low mood problems have shitty friends and family. There are so many very good reasons to have difficulties managing your mood and finding hope. And many of them have nothing to do with a valid diagnosis called major depressive disorder. And then some people have crappy friends and family and major depressive disorder. That happens too, all the time. So this idea that the secret wisdom of being miserable is what's really happening and there's no such thing as mental illness is fucking absurd, just to be clear. And so what I will tell everyone is I wish there was no such thing as mental illness, because the people that I have treated, especially in very acute care settings, I cannot imagine just hugging them enough or getting them on the ketogenic diet or whatever it is. I just can't. I have never in my, 16 whatever years in this industry found a way to like talk someone out of their delusions and hallucinations. It's not how it works. So there is no secret wisdom in being miserable, in my opinion. Depression is sometimes a disorder and sometimes not, and it's often misdiagnosed, is what I will say. Often, very often misdiagnosed, incorrectly diagnosed. Oftentimes, therapists don't do simple things like send them to a doctor to get their blood checked and their hormones checked. There's just so many simple things any clinician can do. And when I teach, one of the things I love doing as a professor, is tell my students, whenever you see a patient with mood symptoms of any kind, send them to the doctor so they can possibly get their hormones checked. Make sure their vitamins are good. Are they sleeping enough? Do they have friends and family? Like, let's look at everything else except for the disorder first. And then, once we've ruled everything else out, then let's find maybe a label. That's my attitude. Seems pretty useful. Because there's a lot of people who are not actually diagnosable that for some reason get a diagnosis. And as Angie said, there's a lot of healthcare providers who want to make money, so they have labels. And that's a perverse incentive. And that needs to change, in my opinion. This has been a rather spicy episode. I'm not normally so spicy. I'm not even that caffeinated. I'm fairly caffeinated, actually, to be fair. So, I've talked about people not wanting to get well. I've talked about perverse incentives in rehabs by therapists, psychiatrists. And, it's... And she's like, I said, I wish they did. I'm trying to. By the way, she said, I like what you said. They don't teach that to therapists or doctors. I'm trying to. I am genuinely trying to. Like, I think that I've always said this on this podcast publicly, and I say it publicly over and over again because it's the truth. I am a very lucky person because the people that I get to work with in my graduate program actually do care. They genuinely care about people getting the correct diagnosis or no diagnosis, because no diagnosis is valid. People can be miserable and not have a diagnosis. That happens all the time in life. Hey, Darren, glad you're here. It's okay. Yeah, watch in the morning. Let me know what you think. I had some spicy things to say. I'd love to hear your take on them. But there are so many competent people out there that are doing the job correctly. So to Angie and other people who are very critical of psychiatry and psychology, there are good providers. They exist, and they're trying not to hurt people, and they're trying to help people, and they're trying to be careful and thoughtful. They exist. Very, very, very clearly they exist. Yeah. Oh, you went to WashU? Yeah, my old man went to WashU. They teach the person in context like five. Yeah, it's sad, but that's an MSW program. That's most MSW programs is what they do. It's like there are careful, thoughtful people. Sometimes they don't exist in the university because people in the university don't care. And that's a shame. But I don't want this to be all negative today. I want to be very, very clear that I'm actually very optimistic about the mental health community and the treatment community and all this stuff because I know that fraud is going to be a big deal and it's going to get taken care of. It's not going to be perfectly eradicated, but it's going to get taken care of. I know that there are a lot of people out there. I had a grad student tell me about some fraud that she was aware of, and like literally she's like trying to find her way out of that job, that issue. And so I'm encouraged because I see more and more people who are not putting up with the sickness of the system, and there are all these alternative programs and these alternative communities that are going to help people in ways that the mainstream medical and mental health communities cannot. So, if you're listening to this and you're feeling a little discouraged because of all of the ranting and raving of today, I just want you to know that it's going to get better. I believe it's going to get better. I see lots of inside information that says it's going to get better. The systems that are crumbling partially because of healthcare companies, all the insurance companies or whatever. Like, it's going to crumble more and more and more. There's going to have to be reform. It's maybe not be big enough or good enough, but it'll be a start. And I see all these people building cash-based alternatives that are definitely going to help people. So because I see so many new businesses and innovative ideas, especially in the metabolic space, I'm also optimistic because of GLP-1s. They're not a miracle cure, but they help people. There's so many things out there that look good and are going to make life better. And technology is going to help. And society is changing. So I don't want anyone who is listening to feel discouraged today, because I'm not actually pessimistic. I'm actually optimistic. I just hate when people try to have a simple narrative about complicated dynamics. And as much as I am disgusted by Rehabistan and I hate that I still participate in it, I see the benefit of it and I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to be a reformer inside of the system. And I'm grateful that I get to do that because I see real change happening in the businesses that I get to affect. So it's really important to not lose hope because there's lots of good people out there. Tons of good people who are trustworthy, who are trying to do the right thing. And I'm not even the best of the people out there. I'm like middle of the road, just doing my best. There's lots of people that are trying to help. There's lots of competent clinicians who are not diagnosis mills and pill mills and things like that. There's lots of good people. So please do not ever, ever lose hope. So I hope this all makes sense. And I thank you all for being here and sharing and commenting because these topics are really important. And the idea of like, it's okay to be miserable and sick because there's some secret meaning you haven't found yet is not true. You can do things to change your behavior and make your life better, regardless of the secret meaning of your illness or whatever. Coping skills and things like that are always available. So thank you for being here. And if you found something I said useful, controversial, if you disagree, call me out publicly. Come at me online. I would love to have a public fight about it because whatever fight we have is going to be informative for people. And I will always fight fair. As disagreeable and nasty as I am, I'll always be fair about it. You know? So let's have it out and let's talk it out and let's figure it out. Because if we can figure it out, other people can figure it out. And it's that simple to me. And that's why that's a good thing. So thank you so much for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please, please, please help me grow this so I can get more people into the fold and talking about the topics. Thank you very much to everyone who came out to chat. Jonathan, Plastic African, Angie, Darren, Phil, thank you for being here. And, you know, if you're on Twitter, please come at me about any of these topics on Twitter. I'd love to talk more about it. I'd love to figure it out better. If there's some better perspective you think you have. If you think you have a more complicated, more nuanced, let's do it. Thank you for the feedback, Jonathan. Yeah, there weren't many belches today. Today was a burp light day. That's really not good. Something is up. Yeah, so thank you for being here. And as always, like, share, and subscribe. Let's build this YouTube platform. And I always try to end on a joke, and I think I have a good one for you, but who knows? Let's see. So I once had this patient, interesting character. He was referred to me because I worked in the addiction treatment space for a long time. And he said, you know, doc, I think I have a food addiction. I said, okay, tell me about this problem with food. So he described, you know, he was kind of overweight as a kid, and he was struggling with, you know, when he feels lonely, when he feels tired, when he feels unimportant, he likes to eat, and he overeats. And he overeats all the typical things. He overeats, you know, food that's super tasty and probably not good for you, kind of fake food. I said, okay, fair enough. And, you know, we spent some time in that first session trying to figure out, like, what exactly kind of set this all off. And so he was telling me about his childhood and some parent stuff and kind of being bullied as a kid. There's a lot of things going on. in this guy's life. And, fair enough. For those of you who don't know, a lot of people that cope with food usually have a variety of things that have happened to them. It's not weird, especially nowadays because food has become so cheap, especially the bad for you food has become so cheap. So anyways, and because I like food, I have a pretty extensive history eating a lot of bad for you food myself. And so I was asking him just kind of, more casually, so what is the kind of food that you think kicked this all off for you, which you call a food addiction? And he said, I think kind of potato chips are kind of like my worst offender, my worst culprit, and fair enough, because chips are like carbs and salt and fat and grease and fake stuff and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, fair enough. I get it. And I said, what were your favorite chips as a kid when you started to overeat? And he said, well, I really liked Pringles. I said, oh, interesting, Pringles. I guess that makes sense. He said, what do you mean that makes sense? I said, well, because for Pringles, once you pop, you just can't stop. All right. Have a good Saturday, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next week. Please, please, please take very good care of yourselves. Eat good food, have good sex, get some good sleep. And I will catch you next week, same time, same place.